Elias followed its gaze. At the base of the fence, half buried in dust and tangled weeds, was a body. Curled up, motionless, as if someone had tossed it there and let the darkness take over. He dismounted, slow and cautious, like he was stepping into land that did not belong to him. The wind picked up, sweeping strands of his silver hair across a face marked by years of scars. Lying there was a young woman. Her face was beaten so badly, it was hard to make out what she really looked like. One eye was bruised purple. Dried blood clung to her cheekbone. Her shirt was torn at the shoulder, revealing long, dark bruises like whip marks. Her chest rose and fell ever so slightly, her breath so faint it was nearly gone. Elias knelt down and placed his hand gently on her neck. There was a pulse, very weak, but still there. A heavy silence spread over the prairie. It felt like the whole land was holding its breath, waiting for his choice. Elias took a deep breath. Memories sharp enough to wear down the heart flashed through him like an old voice he thought he had buried long ago. He lifted her up, so gently it was as if he feared even the smallest touch might hurt her more. "You are all right now. You are safe." His voice was deep, rough, like it came from the loneliest part of his soul. He did not know who she was. He only knew one thing. Someone had done this, and they would come back for her. Elias brought the young woman back to the ranch as the sky darkened. In the small kitchen, the oil lamp flickered, clinging to the last bit of daylight. The house had only 2 chairs, an old wooden table, and a few tools hanging loosely on the walls, all worn, all alone, just like their owner. He laid the girl down on the bed that used to belong to his wife. The sheets were clean, but the warmth had been gone for many years. Elias fetched water from the trough outside and brought it in. He cleaned the wounds on her face, little by little, saying nothing. The girl let out a soft moan. Her eyes fluttered open, just a thin sliver like a faint streak of light. Elias paused. "It hurts, does it not?" he whispered, his voice hoarse and trembling slightly. She did not respond, but her breathing hitched. Her hand curled inward when he touched her shoulder. A reflex, a frightened flinch. Like an animal backed into a corner, Elias slowly pulled his hand away, as if afraid to touch something too fragile. "It is all right now. No one is going to hurt you anymore." He wrapped a bandage around her arm. Her skin was pale, cold like nighttime water. The bruises stretched long and deep, blooming in dark purple. These were not from a fall. These were marks from a beating. When he placed a warm cloth on her forehead, a single tear slipped from the corner of her eye. It was not from pain, it was fear. Elias stood still for a few moments. He had seen that kind of fear before, the kind that kept you from sleeping, from hoping, from trusting anyone ever again. He had lived with it for 7 years, ever since his wife died in his arms. As he turned to wring out the cloth, the girl suddenly whispered, her voice so raw and faint it could have been the wind, "Do not let him fin me." Elias spun around instantly. Who are you talking about?" But she had already fallen back into the dark. A cold breeze swept through the door, making the lamp tremble. Elias looked out into the dark yard. The long, silent fence line, the wooden gate slightly ajar, his own horse tracks pressed into the dirt. There was no sign of anyone watching. But something in him, something that knew the weight of loss, told him this calm was not real. He stood at the doorway, his hand resting on the worn handle of his old rifle, eyes fixed on the road that led to the town of Moiti. And one thought returned, clear as the sound of hooves pounding in his mind. Whoever did this to her would not give up easily. Around midnight, when the wind shifted and the cold began to slip through every crack in the cabin walls, Elias managed to rest for a while on the chair beside the bed. The oil lamp was still burning, its light trembling as if it was about to give up. In that silence, a sharp breath broke through, short, choked, then stretched out like someone pulling themselves out of a nightmare. Elias opened his eyes. The girl was trying to sit up. He quickly stood and reached for her shoulder, speaking softly. "Take it slow. You are still very weak." Clara opened her eyes again. This time, they were not as clouded. She looked around the room, at the flickering light, at Elias's tired, weathered face, as if trying to decide whether this was a safe place or not. "Where am I?" she asked, her voice hoarse, her breathing uneven. "My ranch." Elias replied gently. Outside Moiti. You were hurt. Badly. She touched her cheek, then winced and pulled her hand away from the pain. A long silence followed, long enough for Elias to hear the wood creaking on the porch under the pressure of the night wind. Then Clara whispered, her words sounding like they had been torn from the bottom of her chest. He will come for me. Elias looked straight into her eyes. Who is he? She swallowed hard, her throat trembling. A primal fear clung to her like the darkness gathering in the corners of the room. If you keep me, he will kill you. Elias sat down on the edge of the bed. He looked at her for a long time, so long that Clara finally looked away. Then he spoke, slowly. You are on my land. No one touches you unless I say they can. Clara shook her head weakly. You do not understand him. Elias gently squeezed her hand to cut her off. No, you do not understand me. In the dim light, the truth on Elias's face became clear and silent. He had lost someone. You should not have saved me. He will come here. He always finds me. Elias stepped back, as if her words had hit him in the chest. He remembered. The long whip-like bruises. The torn shoulder. The broken, shallow breaths. The eyes that never fully opened, filled only with fear. Not bandits. Not drunks. These were the marks of someone who had done this many times before. Clara tried to sit up on her elbows, choking on her own words. If you turn me in, you might still live. If you keep me, he will kill you. Elias sat down on the edge of the bed. He looked at her for a long time, so long that Clara finally looked away. Then he spoke, slowly. You are on my land. No one touches you unless I say they can. Clara shook her head weakly. You do not understand him. Elias gently squeezed her hand to cut her off. No, you do not understand me. In the dim light, the truth on Elias's face became clear and silent. He had lost someone, and he would not lose another not like this. She began to cry, not from pain, but because for the first time, the feeling of being protected reached into her terrified body. Outside, the old dog barked at nothing in particular. The wind swept across the porch like a whisper of warning. Elias rose and walked to the door. His hand rested on the worn handle of his old rifle like a habit that never faded, and from that moment on, he knew he had chosen a path with no way back. To protect Clara and face Roar. The next morning, Moiti was bathed in the pale gold of early sunlight. The saloon at the edge of town opened early, and a few men stood on the porch, speaking in hushed tones like they were afraid someone might hear. There was something thick in the air like a weight hanging invisibly above the low rooftops. Elias rode into town in complete silence. He wore no hat to shield his face. He did not hide his eyes. It was the only way to make sure Roar understood that Elias McCrae was not here to negotiate. People in town stopped when they saw him. A few turned and stepped inside their homes. An old woman pulled her grandson close to the wall. Everyone knew. Moiti stayed quiet as long as no one crossed Roar. Elias tied his horse in front of the saloon, where Roar usually showed up in the mornings to check over livestock papers and his goods. The saloon doors swung open. Roar stepped out tall, broad-shouldered, his leather coat still dusty from a long night's ride. His face was the kind that people had learned not to look at directly. But Elias looked straight at him. He did not blink. McCrae, Roar spoke first, his voice casual but loud enough for the whole town to hear. You got here earlier than I expected. Elias answered low and steady. Last night, I found a girl, beaten nearly to death, by the fence. A few people nearby exchanged glances. Someone's hand trembled slightly. What girl? Roar asked. But there was a flicker of caution in his eyes. Elias did not answer the question. He simply spoke, like stating a fact. She was running from a cruel man. A heavy silence dropped over Moiti's main street. Roar smirked the kind of smirk a wolf gives when it sees the prey still breathing. And who might that be? Maybe I can help you find him. Elias took one step closer, just enough for people to feel the weight of the truth. His name is Roar. The crowd froze. A glass shattered inside the saloon. Roar laughed. A short, dry sound with nothing human in it. What did you just say, McCrae? Elias's face did not change. I said, do not touch her again. No one dared breathe too loud. And who do you think you are to say that to me? Roar growled. Elias answered plainly, the man who has seen what you do. Roar stepped back, just half a step. No one noticed except those standing closest. But Elias did. That was enough. The wicked always recoil when exposed. Roar's hand moved to the grip of his gun. A faint sound, metal brushing against leather. A dangerous motion. But Elias did not draw. He did not even touch the weapon. He simply said, voice low as stone, "If you come for her, remember, I will not stand by." The crowd scattered as if a cold wind had swept through. No one wanted to be between these two men for even a second longer. Roar stared at Elias for a long time, long enough for the old man's shadow to stretch across the dirt. Then he spoke, voice quiet and cold. "McCrae, you just chose a path you cannot walk back from." Elias said nothing. He turned and walked back to his horse, his steps firm like iron pressing into the hard ground. In that moment, everyone in Moiti knew. A reckoning had begun. Thank you so much for being here. If this story reminded you of the old days, the dusty afternoons, the sound of hooves echoing in your chest, go ahead and subscribe to my channel, so that every day we can sit down together, and I will tell you another Western tale. Night fell over Elias's ranch like a thick black blanket, no moonlight, no sound of insects. Only the wind passed through the fence, cold and steady, like the breath of some beast circling, searching for the scent of blood. Clara was asleep in the room, her breathing soft and shallow. Elias stood on the porch, eyes fixed on the distant hay barn. He had noticed the signs earlier in the day, a few new boot prints, a piece of horse tack kicked up from the dirt, and the faintest scent of gunpowder on the breeze. Years of life, and even more years as a cowboy, had taught him one thing: someone had been here, and they would come back tonight. He walked to the barn with a lantern in hand. He laid down a bundle of hay in the corner, sprinkled a line of dry straw stretching outward like a thin fuse. Then he lit it. A small flame flickered to life, then crept slowly, winding its way through the straw like a snake searching for direction. It was not to burn. It was to create light, and more importantly, shadow. In the darkness before, Elias looked like a lone man, but under the flickering firelight, his shadow stretched across the barn wall twice his size, 3 times. From a distance, no one could tell where the man ended and the shadows began, or how many people were standing there. Just then, 3 real shadows appeared at the edge of the fence. They moved without sound, but not beyond the ears of a man who had lived through years of silence and death. Elias did not draw his gun. He just stood there, letting his shadow stretch wide across the ground like a warning. The first man crouched behind a wooden crate. The second crept along the fence line. The third, farthest back, looked like the one who thought things through. Elias raised his gun and fired one shot into the air. The sound cracked through the night, echoed off the far cliffs once, twice, 3 times. The fire grew taller, shadows longer. All 3 men froze, like they were staring down a whole squad waiting in the dark. Elias stepped forward once. His shadow leapt across the wall, tall and wide like the shape of a giant warrior. He spoke not loud, but deep enough to drown out the wind. "You do not have to die here tonight." One of the men's hands shook, his gun wobbling. The second looked between the shadow and the man, unsure which was real. The third cursed under his breath, took a half step back. Elias turned his wrist, lowering the barrel of his gun toward the dirt. Roar was wrong. He thought I came here looking for a fight. The flames crackled in the straw. Smoke began to drift into the air. To the 3 men standing there, it felt less like one man in a barn, and more like a trap set by a dozen waiting in ambush. Elias spoke again, slow, firm, unshaken. He thought I would leave that girl behind to save my own skin. He was mistaken. The man furthest back turned and walked away. The other 2 looked at each other, then ran too, stumbling like they had seen a ghost. Elias did not follow. He did not shoot. There was no need, because tonight was not about killing. It was about sending a message Roar could not possibly misunderstand. McCrae does not hunt men, but he will not let anyone be hunted on his land. He stomped out the fire, went back inside, and closed the door. Clara was asleep, peacefully as if the world outside had not just started to boil. The next morning, before the sun could rise above the hills, Elias quietly packed his things. He did not tell Clara. He did not want to frighten her any further. But after the night of fire, he knew one truth as plain as the earth beneath his boots. Roar would come back, and next time, he would not send 3 men. He would come himself, maybe with an entire group. Elias opened the door to her room. Clara was already awake. She sat against the wall, arms around her knees, her face tired but her eyes were brighter than the night before. "We have to leave, do we not?" she asked, voice soft, like she was afraid of breaking the fragile peace. Elias gave a slight nod. "It is no longer safe." There was a pause, and then he added, "But I know a place, far, very far, where the wind is strong enough that no one can follow our trail." Clara took in a long breath. She did not ask the name of the place. She did not ask if it was dangerous. She just looked at his hands, hands rough with calluses, heavy, but warm. And she understood, if there was anywhere to start over, it had to be wherever he was. They left the ranch before the sunlight touched the grasslands. Palo Duro Canyon appeared at noon, majestic, red as a deep cut across the land and sky. Steep cliffs curled in spirals. With narrow paths only the locals knew how to walk. The wind through the canyon made a low sound, like drums echoing from beneath the ground. Clara took a deep breath, the first in many days that did not carry the fear of someone chasing behind her. Elias built a small cabin from old pine wood. Not big, but solid. He dug a water trench nearby, where a spring trickled from between the rocks. Clara gathered dry branches, cleared the earth, slowly like someone relearning how to use her hands. On their first night, they ate stewed beans and cornbread. They sat by the fire, not saying a word. But the silence had changed. It no longer felt heavy like back at the ranch. It was warm, gentle, and had a rhythm, the rhythm of a beginning. The next morning, Elias led the horse along the canyon's edge. Clara followed behind, her steps small but determined. He showed her how to read the wind, how to tell which rocks would crumble and which could hold a person's weight. At noon, they ate by a small stream. At night, they sat outside the cabin, listening to wolves howl in the distance. 3 times a day. In the morning, Elias checked her wounds. At noon, she changed the bandages. At night, he cleaned them with cold water from the stone trench. That rhythm, oddly enough, became the rhythm of their lives. No one mentioned Roar. No one spoke of the town of Moiti. But Clara saw something changing in Elias's eyes, not fear, not weariness, but a flicker of hope. The kind of hope a widower carries for 7 long years, never daring to let it rise above the surface. And down in that red canyon, where the wind always shifted and day melted into night like a running stream, they both understood. They were not safe, but they were alive. And that was something Clara had not felt in many years after being treated like nothing more than property. The evening wind swept through the mouth of the canyon. It carried a scent. Elias recognized instantly the smell of horses ridden hard, mixed with gunpowder that had not yet faded. He was carrying water from the stream back to the cabin when the feeling hit him in the back like an invisible hand. Elias set the bucket down and stood still, listening. Then he heard it. 3 hoofbeats, heavy and steady. They were here. Elias took a long breath and called toward the cabin. "Clara, stay inside. Shut the door." His voice was so calm, it scared Clara more than if he had shouted. She stepped out halfway, lips trembling. He is here, is he not?" Elias did not look at her. He did not answer. That silence told her everything she needed to know. He walked to the open stretch of land in front of the cabin. The wind howled through, and the rocks stood tall like ancient warriors guarding the sky. 3 horses came into view around the bend. Roar led the way, his leather coat covered in gold dust, his eyes cold as untamed steel. The 2 men behind him wore the faces of those long used to doing wrong without a second thought. Roar pulled his horse to a stop in front of Elias, his voice echoing off the canyon walls. "You are hiding what belongs to me," Elias replied, his voice low and steady like the ground beneath them. "I saved someone. I did not hide anything." Roar laughed a crooked, poisonous laugh. "She belongs to me." Elias stepped forward half a pace. "No. People do not belong to anyone." Roar's eyes darkened. "You do not understand, McCrae. I paid for her. I own her." Elias stared directly at him, not with anger, but with pity. "You use money to buy what you think is power, but real power comes from what a man chooses to protect, not what he owns." The 2 men behind Roar moved their hands toward their guns. From the doorway, Clara saw it all. She was trembling, but she did not run. For the first time in years, She wanted to face the past that had once paralyzed her. Roar glanced toward the cabin. She comes out now, or I. Elias cut him off. If you want to fight, take it up with me. But do not lay a hand on someone who is trying to live again. A stillness settled over them. The wind howled harder, kicking up red dust around the feet of the four men. Finally, Roar spoke, voice low and hissing. "McCrae, you are building a mountain between me and what I own." Elias did not draw his gun. He simply placed a hand over his chest and said quietly, "I do not need to be a mountain. I just need to stand in the right place." A simple sentence. But something in Roar's eyes dimmed not out of fear, but because he understood. This man could not be bought, bullied, or bent. Roar took a breath through his teeth. "Fine, if you want to play this game, I will be back." And not with just 3 men. He turned his horse. The sound of hooves faded down the canyon trail. Elias stood there for a long time, and he knew the real storm was still coming. Clara walked up beside him, hands trembling. "You should not have done that." Elias looked into her fear-filled eyes. "You should not have to live afraid. And if someone has to stand up, let it be me." The wind swept over them, carrying the chill of the night to come. A night the canyon itself seemed to know peace would not come easily. 3 days after the standoff at Palo Duro, Roar returned. But not with an army. He came alone. Not because he wanted to, but because no one in the town of Moiti was willing to ride with him anymore. The rumors had spread faster than any horse could gallop. A cruel man who beat women. A man who turned human beings into merchandise. A man who sent killers after someone who had simply saved a girl left to die. Moiti was a small town-wide land, few people, but everyone there knew what loneliness tasted like. And even the toughest men did not want to be seen standing on the wrong side of what was right. Roar rode through town in silence. From the saloon doors, from porch steps, from old wooden stoops. All eyes turned away from him. When he reached the canyon, Elias was already waiting. Roar dismounted, fists clenched, like he was trying to hold on to what little power he had left. "McCrae, I do not want to fight." Elias did not answer right away. He looked at the man in front of him, dust-covered, red-eyed, shoulders slumped like someone who had lost something greater than money. Roar exhaled heavily. She is not mine anymore. The town, they do not stand with me." He let out a bitter, crooked laugh. "I have lost." Elias spoke slowly and clearly. "No man loses by letting another be free." A simple sentence, as plain as the ground beneath their feet, but it cut through the pride Roar had used to hide everything else in his life. He turned toward Clara. She stood at the cabin doorway, her eyes no longer trembling like the first day. Roar bowed his head. For the first time in his life, "I am sorry." Not a grand apology, but enough to make sure Clara was no longer just something beaten, sold, or discarded. Roar rode away. He did not look back. Like the last shadow of cruelty fading from the valley, Elias stood beside Clara. She asked softly, "Do we have to keep moving now?" Elias shook his head. "No. We stay. This place,